transfer over to Medicaid. So Medicaid is a government-run health insurance program for pregnant women, children, people with disabilities, low-income adults, and seniors. 62% of nursing home residents. Medicaid makes up around 30% of state expenditures. So I know Tonya just talked about this a little bit, but Medicaid also exhibits that multiplier effect. So Medicaid spending generates $1.35 to $2 into the economy for every dollar spent. Now you're going to see a very organized graph in the middle of your screen. Those are Medicaid enrollment numbers by county and region. If you click the hyperlink, you can actually open up the Excel worksheet and it will show you everything. But I want to draw your attention to a couple of these numbers. Marion County, for example, 88,846 enrollees. Duval, 222,098. Volusia, 104,214. Gilchrist is 4,663. Levy, 10,877. And that's not all of them, but just us in our neighboring counties. Like, look at how many people use this safety net.
And let's also talk about why the multiplier effect is so high here.
I mean, yeah, if you are sick and you cannot go to the doctor or get the care that you need, I don't think you're going to be able to work.
Not going to be the most productive person ever?
Probably not.
No.
It seems like it's better for the bottom line for our economy, but it might just be a little bit more ethical to treat people with human dignity and allow them to have medical care. All right, so some Medicaid changes. There's now federal work requirements. It repeals the laws that made it easier to enroll or renew coverage. So now you have to renew every year. And you must renew enrollment twice as often. So like I just said, every year.
It used to be once a year currently, and now it's going to be every 6 months.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's when you think about the people that are going through this, the people that need Medicaid, the people that are using these services. I mean, when I was on Medicaid, I know so many people that didn't even have access to internet, and to think that we're going to force them, people that already don't have the resources they need to be level with everybody else, and then force them to.
It's pretty obvious what's going to happen, isn't
it? It kills me. $880 billion in proposed cuts. 10.9 million will lose direct coverage. $7.8 million due to new requirements for direct Medicaid recipients. 3.1 million due to new requirements for those with Medicaid expansion from the ACA market. The bigger changes begin in 2029.
After the next presidential election.
Coincidental? I think not. All right, so this one's really important. We're going to talk about Medicaid work requirements, but we've done this. We've been there, done that. We've tried this before, and it doesn't work. In 2018, the Trump administration allowed Arkansas to enact Medicaid work requirements, and 25% of enrollees subject to work requirements lost coverage. Most who lost coverage were qualified. They filled out the paperwork incorrectly, and there's no evidence that it increased the number of people with jobs. New enrollees had large delays getting coverage because of the excessive paperwork, or because their paperwork wasn't filled out properly, and that led to much higher administrative costs for the state. Estimates are that federal Medicaid work requirements will lead to 15,400 avoidable deaths each year. Now, I just want to touch base before we go to the next slide that when we saw this done in Arkansas, I mean, lives were lost then, and it was just one state. And on the next slide, we're going to see how many avoidable deaths there are.
How much value does life have?
More than you can put in numbers. Projected losses per state, and actually I'll go back. They try to quantify human life in cases all the time, but the numbers are never the same because every human being is different. So, I mean, I think that shows that you can't put a number on the value of someone's life, and unfortunately we try to all the time. Okay, so this slide, projected losses per state from Medicaid work expansion. This is these are the states that are part of that Medicaid risk extension. We are not one of them. So Florida is not on this list, but you'll see some of these bigger numbers. I mean, golly, look at California. 1.1 million enrollees losing coverage, 3,481 lives lost per year. My God. Illinois, 653 avoidable deaths. Indiana, 345.
Arizona, 562.
Even Alaska, 33. Like, that's wild. That's wild. Those are completely avoidable. I think we need to respect that not everyone has the same access to resources, and when we don't have the same access to resources, we should be supporting those who need the assistance so that they can go out into the workplace, so that they can earn more money and provide for their family, so that way we're not using costs for Medicaid because they have to go to the doctor, and we're not having to apply for these programs because we are being treated well enough to make it on our own. And it's such a systemic problem, and we're cutting off the band-aids.
And that was one thing that Arkansas found, was that people wanted to work, but when they lost Medicaid, they lost the ability to get the medication that allowed them to be productive members of society.
Yeah.
And that can take a toll on a person. And once you lose that, it's really hard for those who have the least to get back what they had had previously.
Yeah. All right. This bill does not address increased ACA tax credits. So in 2021, the American Rescue Plan increased marketplace tax credits. These increased tax credits end December 31st, 2025. Now, they've been renewed twice already. If extended, this will be the third time. And if not extended, health insurance costs will increase significantly for 22 million people, especially in states like Florida, without the Medicaid expansion. So 4.2 million people will be uninsured by 2034. Premiums could increase by up to 93%, which means that plans could go up by almost $900 a month. Now, I have one of these plans, and my bill, if it goes up 93%, will be almost $1,000 a month.
Yeah. And then what's going to happen? You can't afford it. And then what's going to happen?
Honestly, what I think will happen is more people will apply for disability just so they have the funds to pay for their medical insurance. But again, we talk about that multiplier effect. If they're on disability, they're not working. So we're not putting that money into the economy.
So the best way to spend that money is really to put it in Medicaid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if federal funds for Medicaid expansion drop below 90%, some states will get rid of it, and another estimated 3.6 million will lose healthcare coverage altogether.
In fact, it's a trigger law where they have to get rid of it if it drops below 90%.
Absolutely. Now, more than 16 million people could lose healthcare coverage through direct Medicaid cuts and failure to extend ACA tax credits. All right, now I want to talk about the Senate Medicaid differences. So what we just talked about was the House version. Now, this version has even deeper Medicaid cuts. And with the cuts that they're proposing, 2 million people and potentially more will be at risk, or they'll lose Medicaid. So now I want to go to these points here. The Senate Medicaid differences. The first thing, it extends work requirements to low-income parents of school-age kids, a group mostly exempt under the House bill. Like the House bill, this fails to extend expanded ACA tax credits. And in Medicaid expansion states, the bill gradually lowers state taxes on hospitals and similar facilities used to fund Medicaid, penalizes states that expanded Medicaid.